start out by talking about neutrality.
Sure.
We had a big party last night.
Uh-huh.
What were we celebrating?
You know, this has been a big year, I think, for neutrality. We're in this founding era of broadband internet, and these years will make a huge difference. And what happened this year was really like a hailstorm out of nowhere, is that the telecom industry thought they were just going to go ahead, pass a bunch of bills, do a bunch of things, and remerge, recreate AT&T. And out of nowhere, the network neutrality movement kind of came, this sort of obscure academic movement, which was based on a bunch of papers, which me and other people wrote, you know, very strange, obscure things, somehow caught the public imagination and changed the entire political dynamic. And so this was a huge victory this year for the people's ability to influence telecom politics.
So we kind of won the first round of this battle. What do we need to do next in terms of ensuring more permanent protection for neutrality?
Well, I think it's clear that it's now in Congress's hand, that the people have shown what they'd like, and that they don't want a discriminatory network. They like the way the internet is. And now Congress, it's in their court, they're newly elected. The Democrats have pledged to support net neutrality, and the question is whether they're going to do what they said they've done. Whether they're going to do what they said they're going to do.
Is there much chance that we are going to get protection for net neutrality passed while Bush is still president?
That's a good question. You know, let me think about that for a second.
Is he going to veto?
You know, Bush has never taken a position on this. Bush has completely different. Obviously, Bush usually is available to the lobby with the greatest amount of money behind it. But even, I think that what is the most important thing, so I don't, actually, let me restart that question. You know, having Bush in the White House makes this a little more difficult. But I think that as long as there's public pressure, as long as there's even the threat of legislation, that has sometimes as much effect as actual legislation. That is to say that as long as the cable companies have to be constantly concerned, cable and phone companies constantly concerned that if they go too far, there will be a legislative wave that even Bush can't stop, then I think that is important. And so the most important thing really is that people have a consciousness that this is their internet, and that they have the right to reach things, that they have rights to get to the content they want, to use the applications they want. And as long as people keep thinking that, that is actually more powerful than any legislation. Because then if those rights are interfered with, and they're understood to be very sort of bedrock rights, there's nothing even the Bush or the Republicans or Democrats or anyone can do to stop the pressure against the phone companies. I mean, there are these occasional groundswells of public support, like media ownership, or like, you know, against the telegraph companies in the early 20th century that have this unusual power to change telecom politics.
What do you think is the best response to phone and cable company spokespeople or PR types who say that net neutrality is really just a way for, you know, big for big sort of e-commerce companies, or for Google or Amazon or eBay to make tons of money off the internet and push the costs for upgrading the internet onto the backs of consumers? This is an argument they make over and over again. What's the best counter-argument to that claim?
Well, that it's completely wrong. I mean, the main thing that net neutrality does is it provides an open playing field for smaller players, for blogs, for Craigslist, for all these companies that need to reach users to make their business, who don't have the money to pay. Now, you know, there's this idea that to upgrade the internet, you know, consumers are going to bear the cost. Consumers are always going to bear the cost of everything. Who spends money here? It's not like, you know, there's free money if you take money out of Google. You know, it's not like there's free money if Yahoo or someone else is forced to pay for it. There's no such thing as free money. The consumer always pays. The question is whether the consumer pays twice. The consumer pays twice when it pays first through having to pay more for Google services or have more advertising on Google if Google has to pay the bell companies. And then it also has to pay the bell companies. So there's a question here of whether the bell companies and the cable companies are going to extract an extra tax on these companies when, you know, at some point the consumer has to pay anyway. So why have it done through these multiple transactions? You know, it's a little bit like U.S. healthcare system. The U.S. healthcare system has a million different parties. And in the end, the result is that people just pay a lot more money. And it's incredibly inefficient with all these kind of bottlenecks and gatekeepers trying to charge each other. You know, the bell companies build the infrastructure. They build the consumers for it. I don't exactly know what's wrong with that model. And if we, sorry, can I do that? If we really think that it's that important to have build-outs, you know, this country spends hundreds of billions of dollars on roads. Why we are not willing to spend anything on broadband deployment is a mystery to me. Other countries look at us and say, you know, the internet, you think roads are more important than the internet? What are you thinking? You know, I mean, roads fine, we like to drive, but, you know, we spend hundreds of million dollars of bridges that go to nowhere, you know, beautification programs. There is almost nothing spent on broadband deployment. And so, you know, if you want to ask who should pay, you know, some of this maybe should be public works projects.
Let's talk more about that. Everybody wants a faster internet, and the telcos have been trying to make the argument for killing net neutrality by dangling this prospect of faster, shinier internet in front of us. Everybody wants that.
Right.
How do we get it? How do we? What is in your mind the best way for us to get a faster internet in the United States?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's a classic infrastructure problem. It is no different than the problem of the electric system, plumbing, the canals, the roads, every classic infrastructure problem. The internet is a very, you know, broadly beneficial network that is useful for everybody. So I think there's two ways. First of all, there's our model whereby, you know, the carriers build it and customers pay for it. And the companies will always argue that they should, you know, be allowed to charge more, have other schemes for making money. They make plenty of money just by building infrastructure and charging for it. And if they won't build it, at some point, I think that government involvement is not out of the question. In other words, government has a major role in every society of building the infrastructure. And there's no reason that government shouldn't either subsidize, give tax breaks. They already actually give a ton of tax breaks. But, you know, to specifically look for broadband deployment. You know, why not have, instead of these tax breaks, there's a huge amount of money today in the United States that goes to subsidizing rural phone service. You know, $8 billion a year to subsidize rural phone service, as if farmers can't afford phones or something. There's no reason that money should not be subsidizing the networks of the future.
So how do other countries do it? How does the United States compare to other countries?
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can talk specifically about Japan. And we know that consumers
Right.
in Japan, for example, they've got speeds of up to, what is it, 100 or even 1,000 times faster than U.S.
Right.
consumers, but they pay about the same.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, I think in East Asia, particularly in developing countries and in Japan, in East Asia, they see this very clearly as tied to their economic fortunes. So they say, you know, if we want to be a rich country, we need to have the best information infrastructure. And in those countries, they tend to have state or very large state-directed telecom companies who are just simply ordered to build a lot more infrastructure. Now, there are costs and benefits of that approach, and you can make a lot of big mistakes. But the difference is they take this problem seriously. You know, in the United States, we have this crazy idea. Everybody knows that things like bridges, the Golden Gate Bridge was not built by a bunch of random companies. It was built by the government for a reason, is you need to connect to these 2 points. And we have this funny idea that we're just going to have all this kind of infrastructure grow on trees. When it takes a sizable prioritization, it has to become a government priority, and it has to be something that we as a society invest in. I'm not sure if I answered all your Japan points,
No,
but yeah.
you did, but
Yeah.
I'd like to stand this point just for one more question, because I think it's something that kind of speaks to patriotism and
Right.
speaks to Americans' sense of competitiveness. You know, America's the birthplace of the internet. Do you think we're at risk of falling behind other, you know, industrialized countries in this regard?
I think the United States is in risk in one regard and not a risk in another regard. America will remain the place for innovation for some time to come. There is an amazing market, an amazing culture of innovation in the United States and in all of North America, of people, you know, writing songs, starting new companies, thinking of new ideas. That is what America has that no country has in quite as strong a way. But what we are weak on, and if you go to an American airport, you know what I mean, is the infrastructure, the stuff underneath the innovation, the stuff that lets innovation get to consumers. And we are in danger because people just sort of ignore the problem and pretend that, you know, a company like AT&T is going to provide it when they have no real incentives to do that. They have incentives to make as much money as possible on phone and cable service. You know, and so I think there's a serious problem of the United States slipping behind on the access side, right? Not on the innovation side. I think we will still be the innovators. But ultimately, if American companies cannot address the American market, in time there is a risk that America's lead in innovation will start to become threatened too. In other words, right now we've been so successful because a company like Google is born and has an immediate audience of 200 million internet users. But if we start to be the slowest broadband nation on earth, that kind of baseline, that addressable market, that boiling pot of innovation may also be threatened.
Let's talk about accessibility.
Can I add actually something to that that might be useful? Government has had a very important role, obviously, in the birth of the internet. It funded it directly. There was an understanding in the 1960s that if we wanted to have a great network, government research was going to be important, government funding, that this was a priority for the people. Now, 30, 40 years later, there's no top-level investment in the internet at governmental levels. There's no national prioritization of having a great internet. We just kind of take it for granted. And I think that's strange. We spend more attention on our roads as if they're the infrastructure of the 21st century. We spend all this time trying to worry about cable as if cable is the most important infrastructure in this country. There's no top-level importance attached to the internet as the carrier of this nation's economy. And unless the government takes seriously the idea that the internet is driving this national economy, that it is driven economic growth, driven innovation, I think we may start to lapse behind.
Let's talk about a little bit about accessibility. 50% of U.S. Let me get this stat right. I think what I read was that 50% of U.S. consumers have no access to broadband in their community at all.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, the reason, I think, is a failure of government policy, in the sense that private companies are not going to serve consumers who are unprofitable. That's been true since the railways, that's been true since airplanes, that's been true in the age of the telephone. People who live in rural areas, you don't make money serving them with service. And so, unless there's some modern version of the idea of universal service, of the idea that a network to which everyone is connected is more valuable, we will continue to see a huge gap of who is on this network and who is not on the network. And that actually extracts a cost for the country, because when more people are on a network, it's more valuable. We knew that in the phone network. We knew the phone network was going to be more valuable when everyone was connected to it. That is the idea of universal service. Today, for some reason, there's no conception that as a country we are more valuable when everyone's connected.
What about affordability? I mean, beyond the issue of just having access, even if, say, 100% of U.S. households had technical access to broadband,
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that they could afford it.
Right.
How do we get a more affordable internet, in your view?
Well, that would have to, in time, the prices should come down. The problem really is a problem of monopoly pricing. I mean, the marginal cost of running these networks is very low. One of the major problems is complete lack of competition. And so if there's two games in town, they both charge $50. Whoops. I'm sorry.
Sorry, please continue.
Okay. I mean, a major problem in that respect is lack of competition. If there's only one or two games in town, they both charge $50. Why do they have any incentive to lower their rates to $20? It's a classic problem. And there's two solutions. One is government can regulate the rates. Dangerous, because it's hard for government to get that right. Or we can have more competition. And right now we don't have it.
How do you get more competition?
Well, one way is, as I've said, is the government gets actively involved in creating new pipes to the home. And whether this is municipal Wi-Fi, whether this is government building out fiber, whatever it is, when you have more ways to get to the home, it makes a big difference. And if we have a future where we have at least 3 pipes, I believe prices will go down. Let me take municipal Wi-Fi. And this may go way, I know you're making a mini documentary. Municipal Wi-Fi, for example, if you had free Wi-Fi in municipalities the same way you basically have free garbage collection, if we thought of this as a basic service, like plumbing, that should be available to people, well, then you'd have a different situation. You'd have basic broadband internet service for everyone, and that would force the cable and phone companies, if they want to attract customers, to be better, to be faster. to actually put some pressure on them to deliver something better than the city delivers. And so I have great faith in technologies like municipal Wi-Fi, I mean, or whatever else turns out. But basically, the public entities taking a role in making this country both more viable, more culturally vibrant, and more economically sound for the future.
Just circling back to the neutrality fight, as we look ahead at sort of, what's going to be important in the sort of the Save the Internet campaign for the next, say, 3 to 12 months, is the fact that the sort of anti-neutrality forces have been kind of beaten back in Congress means that they're going to start attacking like individual state legislatures instead and try and shift the battle from a sort of federal level to a state-by-state level?
I think we could see a big battle in the states over the next 12 months, not only in that direction. It is definitely true the national level, sorry, let me say this carefully. It's definitely true that the Bell and cable companies have much more lobbying power at state levels because they invest in it. And groups like Free Press can't afford to have people in 50 different states. However, state attorney generals are starting to wake up to the net neutrality issue as a consumer protection issue. They're starting to wake up to this. I'm addressing a group of them next week, I think. And there are those who want to kind of, for example, put pressure on Verizon to do the same thing that AT&T has done. So there will be, I would suspect this year, a battle in the states, and that's where we may see the next story, network neutrality, over the next year pan out.
Are there any particular battleground states that we should be keeping our eye on?
I think New York State is one to watch. We have a new Attorney General, Mario Cuomo, who has got an agenda to fight for consumer rights. He has to do something at least as good as Spitzer's done, and so Eliot Spitzer. So New York might be a place to watch. It's the home of Verizon, and Verizon is the last non-neutral carrier. Oh. Sorry.
That's all right, Josh.
I may have to go soon, but
yeah. Last question for you. As I was sort of educating myself.
Can I add one more thing about Battlefronts? Yeah.
Before you do that, I want to say hi to Tim.
How's it going? Oh, there we go. How's
Good
it going,
to
man?
see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
VIP dinner, you're coming with us.
Tonight or is it tomorrow?
Tonight.
Okay, great.
So Franny will tell you about it.
Okay.
Will you join us in that room next door when you're done here?
Sure.
Thanks.
Shoot, what we?
Yeah, of course.
You guys aren't as sensitive as the. Okay.
Sorry, were you in the middle of making?
Oh, I was going to talk about wireless. I'd say this year there's going to be two major fronts. First of all is a battle in the states, which is basically a battle between state legislatures on one hand and consumer-oriented state attorney generals. The second is wireless. Wireless has sort of been out of the picture. If you take a look at wireless networks, they are a mess of anti-consumer designs, carrier abuses, deceptive advertising, massive violations of network neutrality rules, principles. So the wireless networks may be where we start to see increasing pressure as broadband stays the way it is.
Last question. It's kind of an obscure one, but I found your comparisons in the Moyers documentary between the fight we had over the telegraph or
Right.
the way that an electrical system works and the fight we're having now on the internet are really helpful in helping
Right.
people to get this issue.
Yeah.
As somebody who's kind of done the research and looked at this stuff historically, were telegraph companies making the same kinds of arguments that internet companies are today? And in the same way that, like, one of the biggest problems we face is that the technology is new and people don't understand it.
Right.
When you explain it in terms of the telegraph, they get it immediately.
Right. Right.
But did consumers have the same problem back then? Were they like
It was worse. I'll say two things. First of all, they made almost exactly the same arguments. They said it's more efficient or better to have one company run the telegraph system for the whole country. That was the one argument. And they said, well, of course, it's our telegraph, and so we pick and choose what gets to be carried. Of course, that meant, back then, carrying some candidates' messages and not others. I mean, the telegraph company is the worst case scenario for a network neutrality story, for even just a carriage story, is they use their power to try and throw elections directly. They said, we've got this control over the wires, we want this candidate to win, they're going to win. And they did everything they could with their wires to make that happen. That's a worst case scenario. And, their defenses were the same. It's our property, it's the same as anything else. We need incentives to build this stuff, all the same. And, how a country handles its information networks says a lot about what kind of country we live in. You know, what kind of infrastructure we have, what kind of roads, trains, telegraphs, really is more or less what kind of society we are. And I think you look back at countries who succeed and fail in this, it really tells a big story about what kind of countries they turn out to be. And we have a choice, and we've chosen correctly in the past. You know, this country chose correctly to have a great telephone network that connected everybody and was non-discriminatory. We chose, in the early days of the internet, to build the internet as a society, to make it open to everybody, and it's been an incredible driver of the economy. With the broadband internet in the 21st century, it's the same old questions again, and we have to get them right again. We've done it right before, and America can do it right again.